Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are delighted to be here, wherever you are. While we're recording it here, it is freezing in the UK, like absolutely Baltic. It was minus 6.5 degrees centigrade yesterday when I came out of my car, which was very interesting. I know our guest today, as we're going to talk, it's not minus 6.5 where she is, but yeah, looking forward to having a good conversation today. Steve, how are you, buddy?
Why do I ever try and mute my microphone? Because I can't ever get it back on when we go through this rigmarole and conversation every single time. I'm just going to leave it on and you'll just get the heavy breathing, ladies and gentlemen. Or I'll just move away like that. But yeah, I'm good. I'm fine. The cold weather has meant I'm just not wearing shorts and I might have had to put socks on because I'm a northerner. But for those people that are in... I've put socks on, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I put socks on. It's a strange feeling to have socks on my feet when I'm not going out running. I'm not sure if I like it. But for those people in the south of England that are listening, I feel sorry for you. It's almost hell is freezing over. They're not used to this cold, Ben. They've had to put
this is what we do.
We put a bigger jacket on, maybe some warmer clothes. They just panic
socks,
and all the trains stop. All the trains are cancelled. Nobody leave the house. It's like the day after tomorrow. Apparently, wolves are running around London at this time because of the ice cold and everything else. The wolf pack. Yes. But yeah, I'm good. It feels like Christmas was a million years ago. But yeah, good. Hitting the ground running and business is booming. I'm excited for Bet and all the different stuff that we've got going on leading up to it. So yeah, it's good. Happy times, mate.
Sweet. Well, we have got a guest who is not in minus degrees, probably ever. But it is wonderful to be joined by a guest. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you are in the world?
My name is Leisa Grace. I'm actually enjoying all this northern accent. I am from London, so obviously getting all that northern accent in there is just like, ooh, I'm in Abu Dhabi, people. So I'm Leisa Grace Wilson from Teach Middle East. I'm in a mostly sunny 22 degrees weather. I've got my little fan with me. So while people are freezing, I'm fanning away the heat. But it's good to be here, guys.
Yeah, well, it's really great to have you. And I know that you have been out in the Middle East, in the Emirates for a while. And looking forward to hearing about the work that you do, why you do what you do. I know you have your own podcast. We're going to hear a little bit about that as well as some of the things that you've been posting out. Some always posted out great stuff, but there's been some stuff that I've seen most recently that I think is absolutely relevant for educators wherever you are in the world. So whether you listen to this over in the US or in the UK or around the world, some of the stuff that you've been talking around LinkedIn and about pivoting, I think it's really, really important that we hear that messaging. But just Lisa, if you could just give us a little bit of a synopsis of what got you to where you are now before we get into talking about Teach Middle East.
Yeah, what got me to where I am now? I'd say turmeric and ginger. No, I'm joking. So in 2010, I actually left my leadership role in London. Shout out to Tottenham, Haringey, Parkview School. I left that and I was headhunted by a company called North Anglia Education to come out here as an education advisor to work with the Abu Dhabi Education Council on the education reform. And I've never left. So after working with the reform for a few years, writing curriculum, training teachers, principals, etc., then I went on to lead a massive school in Al Ain, another shout out to Al Shaheen School, big school of over 1,000 students, over 200 staff. I was the academic principal there for many years. I would say about 5 going on 6 years. But I've always been a writer. I'm a little bit of a mad hat. So I write, I speak, and I do that. I used to do that online. Even in the UK, I used to do that a lot. And then when I came out here, I started doing it for Teach. And then in 2018, so I'm really chunking the story together because lots of things happened in between. But in 2018, I wanted a change from school leadership. And I thought, what could I do that would still keep me in education because I love it and I love the space and I'm always a teacher. I've taught for 20 odd years. And then it just came together. The former editor of Teach Middle East was stepping aside, and I was like, I'll take over. Like, I was a writer before, so I was like, I'll take over. And then I took over, and then I became a partner, and now that's what I do full time. I write for Teach Middle East. I speak. I write all my garbage on LinkedIn. You can follow me for my garbage over there. And I do host a podcast, which we can talk about later. But above all of that, I'm still a teacher at heart. So I still go into schools and do workshops. I do consulting, help schools prepare for inspections, and all those good stuff that I used to do previously. I still do them as well.
And I know we've discussed and had quite a few people on that have made the transition from UK to Middle East and those steps. How varied is it? How different is it in terms of is it just different place and slightly varied expectations based on private schooling, or what is the hardest transition apart from the fact that -6 to +26 or +22? What did you find the most challenging as leader, or actually is it leadership is just leadership in a different space?
That's a good question, Steve. I think leadership is leadership wherever you are. What I found, I wouldn't say challenging, but I found interesting was navigating the different cultures. So in London, I was dealing with, I was in North London, I was in Tottenham. I call that Little Jamaica because I'm from a Jamaican background, and Tottenham is Little Jamaica, and so is Brixton. And so I had a lot of Afro-Caribbean students and parents and even colleagues. I think I found the transition here with the varying nationalities like, whoa, for a minute I had to like, how do you deal with this person? Do they understand your sense of humor? Are you coming off wrong? Like, will they misunderstand you? So there was a lot of that to navigate in the beginning, but I think the issues are similar everywhere. If you look beneath the surface. So yeah, it was just getting that little bit first, that little shock over with, and then it was all right from there.
My question, could you find any good jerk chicken in the Emirates?
There ain't no jerk chicken out there. And you know what, Ben? They've had, like, recently, because I've been out here since 2010. Recently, there are 2 Caribbean restaurants that opened, and I went and tried their jerk chicken, and I was like, if I could teleport to London, I would teleport, because it wasn't, no disrespect to people if you're listening to this, like, you cooked what you cooked, but it wasn't jerked enough. That's just it. But
you cook normal roast chicken. It's basically plain.
Yeah,
it's basically just like a Sunday dinner in Yorkshire. It's a Sunday dinner. I expected Yorkshire puddings and some carrots alongside it. That ain't jerk chicken.
Yeah,
exactly. So it wasn't jerking.
That probably was maybe too spicy for me. Still, I'll be honest. I don't.
I love jerk. Oh, I love jerk chicken. Yeah, and my auntie was married to a Jamaican for a long time, so I got to taste all sorts of cool. Like, got into. I tried plantain. I tried all sorts of cool stuff. Right, so jerk. I'm cool on that. So obviously you've gone out into the Emirates. Leadership is leadership. We agree there that is the case. When you lead in a country that is, or in provinces, different like elements of the Emirates that are developing at pace that like nothing I've ever seen. Obviously, my first visit out there last year, and we're seeing that, and people are saying like 30, 40 years ago, this was just desert, right? And now it's moving at a pace. And I know there's an expectation, right? So in those schools, in those international schools, and in the Emirati schools, and from the governmental layer, there's a whole expectation that things move fast, and that things are going to be top level. Was that a challenge? Is that a pressure? Is that still something that's live and real?
So it is live and real. Okay, the ambition out here is nothing you've seen before in your whole life, and the speed at which they do things. Like, okay, for example, the school that I led, with my Emirati counterpart, because what they did, they put a Western principal, quote unquote, that word Western, anyway. I'm not going political on this podcast, Steve. Don't worry. So that Western principal, which was me, and a local Emirati principal, that school was built in 18 months. It had capacity to hold 2,000 students. Now you think of that in terms of not just that school being built. At the time, they were building over 20 schools of that same magnitude across the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, and putting in principals from the United States, from the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc., alongside an Emirati counterpart. And they were also upgrading the universities, upgrading the curriculum. And all of that must take place within the space of 3 to 5 years. So it was a big, big mammoth task. But they're not afraid of stuff like that out here. You know, things that would make our heads spin, they're like, no, let's do it. We can do it.
Does that bring a greater complexity that maybe the education and state education in the UK might not understand? So if you're a leader in for example, in a primary school or a secondary school in Tottenham, in Little Jamaica, go back to those times, and you're sitting there and you're eating your jerk chicken and you're thinking, actually, we need to make sure that we're getting the bums on seats per se in terms of our catchment area, but we know who's made the first choice, who's made the second choice, who's made the first choice. We kind of know roughly what it's going to be. The population is growing, so actually there's probably not enough spaces and not enough classrooms, and we're having to fit 14 to a space that probably would have been comfortable with 20. How does that feel to then a hyper-competitive market where schools have been popping up left, right and centre? Is Abu Dhabi and the Emirati growing that significantly in terms of its population that those schools are needed, or actually is it becoming where those schools are competing with each other? Does that add a different dynamic to education leadership compared to what you were used to? Is that a conversation, I suppose?
Never looked at it that way and made that comparison, but that's a good one to think about. Because what had happened with Abu Dhabi is that they had some schools, but the population is indeed growing, obviously not as fast as, UK, because immigration in the UK is different than how it operates here. If you come here as an expat, you have to go to a private school. I worked in the government sector. But one thing I realized that they were doing is future-proofing. So what they were doing is that they were building schools with the vision of the population growing and not having to panic by already building in capacity. And that is what made it such an interesting project, because they were then thinking about the future by having spaces for labs and spaces for maker spaces and swimming pools and music rooms. Like, they were going ahead of what was currently needed. It was fascinating stuff.
Sorry, Ben. I think if you relate that to industry, the first time I kind of came across something that was similar to that was Google. I was in Stockholm in the Google office, and I walked into a space that had 3 empty spaces. It were just desks, brand new chairs, brand new desks, brand new carpet. It had a docking station and 2 screens on every desk. And I said, "Is this old stuff? Who's moving in here? Are they moving in next week?" I was just asking those questions. They said, "No, this is a preparation for growth." And I was like, "What?" Like, literally, I've come from, and Ben was spent time in further education, and like yourself, Leisa, where you probably the week after you've got the students and you've kind of realised you've got more students and you've got seats, you're then having to buy the seats rather than getting the kids to stand. Like, it's a very different dynamic if you're looking at, we'll build 5 classrooms and all these different spaces based on maybe a future plan of where not just the standard classrooms and the boxes that we get in often around the world, but the maker spaces, the flexible learning outside of the classroom space, and all those things. Our vision for education and the teaching and learning is to get to this stage. We're not ready for maker spaces. We're not ready to be project-based learning just yet. We need those spaces because that's where we're going to get to and train staff to. Literally, there's probably UK people thinking it's all about the money. It's actually vision coinciding and clashing like an iceberg with investment, yes, but actually a vision of where the education is going, not just doing the same thing and buying the chairs to sit the seats.
I put it to you, Steve, that the UK has just as much money.
I agree. 100%. I agree. But it's run very, very differently. And I had this conversation. I think we had it on the podcast where in England, specifically, let's say England, education, transport, health, all go into one person's room and knock on that person's door. They have a meeting and say to the Treasury, can I have some money, please? Can I have $1 million? And the Treasury, the person sitting behind the desk goes, yes. What are you going to show me? In education, the third person, it's kind of like I'm telling a joke. The Irish man, the English man, and the Scottish man walk into a room. It's not that funny, ladies and gentlemen, because you live in it. But you've got the transport person coming in saying, for $1 million, I'm going to show you, I'm going to build this many roads. And then you've got the health and saying, I will reduce waiting times by this percentage if you give me $1 million. And then education goes, I really want to do this, but I'll get better GCSE results, because it's a tangible thing that they can demonstrate rather than actually allowing a vision that isn't led by money. I think it was the real David Cameron that talked about it, and everything else, where we've been led by accountants. It's very, very different. Money's money. There is a vast amount of money, and also how much money is going to awarding bodies, to Ofqual and all those kind of things. It's actually, there's money in education. The problem is it's being spent in some really different ways, but I've waffled a little bit there, Ben. I don't know if you want to come in, Leisa.
I agree. And the other thing is that the pace of change, and I mentioned that in that first part to you, the pace of change is very different. So we've got to go through hundreds of different reviews and proposals and this and that and the other. I went out to Abu Dhabi, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, Steve, before. I went out in November. I was involved in a few different bits, including gas and other things. And one of the things that we've been working on was about ADEC's new policies. So ADEC have introduced, ADEC is the Abu Dhabi Department for Education, essentially, the equivalent of that. And for September 2025, there are 37 new policies that are being introduced. That's when they are, they've been introduced, they've been launched, these are what they are. But from September, these are going out, and that's the expectation. So they've not just gone, right, what we'll do is we'll start with this, we'll start with a little bit of this, and a few people can do it. They've gone, no, this is what we're doing. Here's 39 new policies. We'll find a way to make that happen. And the pace of change, and yes, of course it is, it's a little bit unnerving, and I can imagine it's a bit unsettling, but it's a case of, hold on a minute, we can do something different here. Like, we can do something really, really different here. And let's do it. Let's find a way. And there probably will be some organisations that aren't ready, and then there'll be consequences in that space. But that's what you live and breathe, isn't it?
Yeah, and there'll be support as well. I just had Sylvie Wald, who is the head of the policy department at ADEC, on the Teach Middle East podcast. I think it's coming out soon, that episode. And the process they went through to put those policies in place was quite meticulous. And of course, there will be schools that will have to grapple with how to comply. But hey, listen, the policies are there, and you have to adhere to them. And I think it's great.
I agree. And actually, what's really interesting is that we've talked on the podcast at our event, some of the publications we put out there, we talk about how culture first, strategy second. A lot of people go strategy first or whatever. And interestingly, in this space, and I talked about this when I was out there, is that this is a policy, but this policy is birthed in strategy, and it's birthed in a culture that says we're going to move, and we're not going to be stifling growth. We're going to be visionary. We're going to think about future-proof. So the culture is based there, that we can create strategic decisions and then add policies. And what I think happens in a lot of organisations and in a lot of spaces is they go, the policy is the thing, and then they go, oh, we need to work backwards. Well, no. You start with the culture, and then we work to it, and that's what I've seen there. So interestingly, you mentioned there about Teach Middle East, that you joined as the editor of the magazine, and obviously the podcast is there. Talk to us a little bit about what Teach Middle East is, and what you do.
Yeah, so Teach Middle East is essentially a platform for educators, which provides them with resources to function optimally in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So it's quite twofold. So for in the classroom, we do CPD articles, webinars, workshops, and we do have a catalog of events. And then for outside the classroom, we do something called After the Bell, which is all your personal development type stuff. We host, social stuff as well, really because it's a different atmosphere. When you come out here, you don't have family and your friend groups might be limited because you're moving to a new region, a new country. So as a teacher, your needs are a little bit different from what they would be in the UK. You'd go to work and then you'd come home and that would be fine. But for coming out here, the magazine and magazine I call it, but really it's a media platform, stands as that nice place where you can connect with fellow educators, and not only for your professional development, but also for your personal development as well.
That's brought a really, and I know we're going to talk about that as a publication, because ultimately I'm guessing it must be, if that is not the culture, but if there's a people transitioning into to living somewhere else, that actually that is a real lifeline to connect, and the community must be really, really strong, and those events must be really, really well attended, I can't imagine. But I suppose on the flip side of that, one thing I've not thought about is if you're an individual that's single or just a family, and usually it takes a village, doesn't it? I think somebody posted it the other day, and you're then a mum and dad, and you've taken your children out, or a mum or a dad and dad, or you're a family unit that just say that, or you're an individual that's moved as a young professional out to there. Does that change the dynamic of leadership going back to that side of it, or the role that you play in terms of this to support those people to actually have that side outside of education rather than being the only purpose that you have when you're out there? Because I can see that potentially could be lead to burnout when people aren't even realizing, because all they've got is work, and is that something as a leader and what you're trying to achieve from the publication is to try and support that reduction?
Yeah, because I think what we're trying to do is to create that safe space for educators who've made that transition where, sometimes things happen, there are no family members to call. It's about, we are not the ones who they would call. We create the platform where they can create the networks of people that they could tap into. Because when you come, you don't know, apart from the people in your school, which is not always the best idea to be so tight with. It's good to know other people in other schools and other areas. And so what we do at the start of every academic year, we have something called a welcome reception. And last year we had several hundred teachers there. What it is, it's just, you're new to the Emirate, you come and we play games and we network and we meet, and you leave with a couple of phone numbers, a couple of LinkedIn, profiles that you can connect with. You leave with different people you can tap, so that when the school year starts and all the beautiful newness wears off and the reality sets in, you've got someone that you can contact if you need that help. And so for us, we are serving the purpose of creating the opportunity for connection, because that is so important. If you don't have that, you'll end up in your apartment or your villa or wherever, isolated. And that is where the problem comes in.
Massively. And that community element is something that I think is really interesting hearing you speak there and thinking about when I first started teaching, and it'll be the same for all of us on the call today, on the podcast today. And I think for most people who've been teaching any time longer than, I don't know, probably about 10 years, there used to be this thing called the staff room. And
I know that
in schools, right? So yeah, and some schools still have it, and it's always lovely to see that. And the primary school where I'm chair, governors there, they still have a staff room, and all the staff still go in there at lunchtime and at break time, and it's lovely. And I think there's something quite interesting about why that then has success. When I first started teaching, as a trainee teacher at the school that I ended up getting a job at, I remember going into the staff room and being totally overwhelmed by how many people were in there. sat in somebody's seat that was the wrong seat. I've talked about this before on the podcast, which is like, oh. And then there were places like Compost Corner, that's what one of them got called, where all the old people used to sit and fester. Like a joke. And then there were the cool kids, and there were the sport people, and this and the. But I got brought in really quickly to a group of blokes who, and they were all blokes at this point, who had been teaching 15, 20 years. They took me under their wing. They made sure that I had when I went in, they found out what I had for my brew, and they put it on their list. So when whoever was in first was making the brews, and I tried to get in there first a lot of times because I wanted to make a bit of impression. They gave me tips and tricks and this and that and the other. And I managed, I think about Richard Curfey and Kev Cordwell, Martin Langan, Steve McHale, Andy. I remember then because they looked after me as a young buck, as a young lad in that space. That staff room meant, I remember when we did a new build, they didn't put a staff room in it. And they were like, because teachers don't have time for that. And people were, and we know they've had the conversation about teachers sitting at the desk and having their lunch at their desk, and that staff room mentality has shifted. And I get it. I understand there are pressures and changes, but it's really lovely to hear that what you're doing there, I suppose, in a lot of ways, is creating that staff room initiation, induction that we used to have. In the work that you're trying to do, is that, I suppose, that in one of that, that's just one example of building that community, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think also when you think of the staff room, you think of a place where you could potentially find someone whose shoulder you can lean on. So for schools to say, oh, it's not necessary, maybe they're trying to stamp out things like gossip, but that's what WhatsApp is for nowadays, which, you can't fix that by taking out the staff room. That's ridiculous.
And just on that, I think it's just a sad bit of when older buildings are, like I say, the cost of new buildings. How many classrooms can we get for the investment and the space that we need? We need 10 classrooms with 2 form entry. We need this and this and this. And actually, as schools develop from what they were, the first thing that probably going is what are those spaces. I've seen it where I've been in further education where they're getting rid of the student opportunities for community spaces and putting them into classrooms and everything else, basically, because they're just running out of space and there isn't any money in it. And I'm like, but what you have to bear in mind is if you get rid of all that space, they won't learn outside of that circle that's in their class. And also, why do you think they're coming? People say, yeah, but they're not here to communicate and they're not here to make friends and they're not here to knock about. They can do that outside or anything else. I was like, right, look at where in a city they're going to do that. And also, what is your standout against a virtual school or a virtual college? And I said this 3 or 4 years ago when I was still in education. They went, you're deluded. That's not going to change the world. And look where those pop-ups of virtual schools are coming. Because I remember, and I said, if online schooling comes and they basically come in and they do this and they leave and you'll get rid of all of the community spaces, why would they come here? Because you are not, the reason they're coming is that facilitation, that connection, that community, that collaboration piece, whether you like it or not. And they go, yeah, but they're doing that and they're not coming, they're turning up late to class. Well, that's a behavioural issue thing. And also, is it the fact that they've got such a terrible home life, some of the kids that I was working with, that actually this is the only time they get to laugh and do anything. They're not doing anything bad. They're not smashing the place up. It's your perception because you don't want to do that and you want them to come and learn. Okay, well, your responsibility. And I remember having a teacher say, just sit down there, go get them. And I was like, well, I'm not being funny, but I'm going to tell you something. Maybe make your lessons a little bit more fun and they might come. Like maybe give them an opportunity to speak to each other, guide the learning a little bit more. But ultimately, they don't want to come because they're bored. And I remember I was in HR the week after. But you get what I was saying. I was trying to just say, look, I was trying to say, ignite them. Light the fire underneath them to really come in and be inspired by your classroom. If they're going to sit and chat about football, well, maybe give them 5 minutes to talk about it in the classroom. Well, I'm meant to be learning. Yeah, but they're doing it downstairs and they're missing the first 10 minutes of the lesson anyway. Come on, this is the bit where we're just forgetting the connectivity, the opportunity to really come together and have a chat. He's still learning. We've just lost sight. I'll go back to Valerahan quite a few years ago of what is the purpose of education? What is the purpose of learning? What is the purpose of these buildings? And it is not just classrooms after classroom after classroom. For educators, and for students as well. I think we need to make sure that those spaces are there, prominent, and celebrated and supported and pushed more.
Yeah,
I've got myself
I
up.
agree.
I'll climb down. Ben, you go to the next question or something, mate. Get me off this soapbox.
Steve loves a soapbox. To be fair, it's usually I like getting on a soapbox as well and like making a massive thick statement. But mate, I'm with you. I absolutely hear it. I think Darren Coxon on the podcast, and I know that you know Darren, Leisa. He has talked more often than probably about just about AI. He talks about we've got to make school. Why don't we make schools places where young people want to be and learners want to be? It's not like about entertainment. It's not about competing with TikTok. But I know, and I had a conversation with a parent just this morning who said to me that the only reason why their kids go to school is for the social aspect. They're an only child. They go for the social aspect. Now, I'm not saying, I know that they were probably being a bit like dramatic, but the reality is that the social element is so important, and that's why we're not the people that are saying everything can be online. I do think there are opportunities for that, but I do think the social element that sits in there, and for students and for staff, there's an element that sits in there. You obviously got a podcast as well. Talk to us a little bit about some of the kind of conversations that you have on in that space.
Yeah, so for my sins, I'm joking. So every week we have a guest on the Teach Middle East podcast, which has been going on now for 3, going into the 4th year this year, where we speak to educators not only in the Middle East. So I have to say it's globally. And what we do is we talk to them. We have two streams on the podcast. One is called Behind the Principal's Desk, where we speak only to principals about their lives outside and inside of school, just to really shine a light on the work that they're doing. And then the other segment of the podcast is about speaking to educators who are doing something to move the needle. And that could be writing a book or research or consulting, whatever the work is that they're doing to move the needle. We talk to them about that. And I love the podcast because the podcast is an opportunity to learn. I just sit there, remain curious, ask the questions, and learn the loads. And over the years, I've been fortunate to speak to some really fantastic people and just watch the podcast grow. I think one of the things I find most fascinating about this medium of podcasting is how it creates this intimate space between the listener and the host or hosts in this case. You're in the people's ear. I've called places. I think I was speaking to Kai Vacha recently. I've called schools and I say hello and they say hello. And the minute I start speaking, they go, "Oh, you are the person from the podcast." And I'm like, how is that? Like, how mad is it that you know my voice from a podcast because maybe I interviewed their principal and so the whole staff listened to it? Or maybe I spoke to an author or someone they were interested in and so they tuned in. And so every week, every Sunday, or sometimes Monday, depends on if we're on a holiday, we drop a new episode. And we send it out to our database. So Teach Middle East is lucky we have a very big database because we've been in the space for over a decade. So we send it out to tens of thousands of educators across the GCC. And it's really one of those things where if I ever retire from doing everything else, I'll keep doing the podcast. I love it that much.
We've been doing this for such a long period of time, and I think people often think about, well, you must be getting paid a fortune for it. Why would you do that when it must take so much time and everything else? And I was like, just try it. Just try it and see whether, and ultimately, if you don't enjoy it, nobody wants to do anything. People like in January, motivation, discipline, all those kind of things. Don't go to a gym, anybody in the UK right now. But I think ultimately people are more motivated by something that they enjoy. And if you enjoy podcasting, if you get a lot out of it, then ultimately money is only a certain motivation, fun, enjoyment, and everything else in terms of, Ben's probably the most passionate lifelong learner I've ever met. in terms of reading. Ben reads more books in a week than I probably read in a year. One, because I can't read, it's probably Audible for me, or audiobooks. But generally, it's that whole thing of, because you're probably same, Lisa, because you're passionate about your own personal development, I think that comes out and people are more keen to listen to it because you're lighting the fire underneath them and because you're inspiring and because of your passion for it. Nobody wants to listen to a boring person. And I think that's what, and it just keeps going around in a positive circle of, I enjoy it, keep doing it, people keep listening to it. Just that constant, you're not going to continue to do it, or maybe you would if you've got one listener. But people are more likely to listen to it.
Is.
Yeah, if it's a really important person, maybe so. Maybe if it's just a guest you've had on, maybe not, because you might as well have just had that. But ultimately, it's just that circle of, because you're passionate about it, more people will listen to it. Because more people listen to it, you get more passionate about it. It's just a constant snowball effect of positivity, I think. And I often talk about trying to support educators to think differently in regards to using the medium of podcasting for learning. And people say, it takes so much to set up. I was like, it doesn't. You could do it on Zoom. What that looks like, and you don't need the technical stuff. You don't need to get to that point. If you've got some money, you invest and you do that. And I created 2 podcasting spaces in a new space before I left education, which will be 4 years in June. And I remember creating those spaces and padding up walls and everything else. And they could be used for one-to-one meeting rooms with students and parents and all that other stuff as well. But also they had the kit in the desk that could be pulled out and put onto a desk. Because I was like, if you want to inspire learners a little bit different, why don't you just record it? Because you're doing all this stuff during COVID of online Zoom stuff. Just have a conversation. Maybe bring somebody in, somebody that teaches on the same course, or just talk to yourself in terms of the content. Maybe bring some learners in and have a conversation so they can listen to themselves or some previous students. There's loads of different ways to do it, but I don't think many people use podcasting as a medium for learning in education. But so many people as educators now use it. Why is it good enough for them, but not good enough for students? It's a strange one, I find. Don't know where I'm going. Not a question.
I think the other thing that sits in there is that podcasting, and I know that there's a lot of podcasters who talk like this, is it allows for that more longer form discussion. And you mentioned about that sitting back and being curious. I do that when I'm hearing that. I just feel like sometimes that somebody's got an idea that's different than mine, or that might echo what I have, but is there a little nuance I can take from that? But the difference is that this is not a 30-second snippet. And I interestingly, in an instant world where TikTok is proliferated and like the quick Instagram reels, there's something really positive about a longer form conversation. And somebody talked about this in terms of like even news media. Like news snippets are now like few seconds, few minutes. Like you interview somebody goes on and they talk about, there's nobody having long form conversations because you've got to get 20 news stories out as opposed to let's dig into them. And I think that's what podcasting allows us to do. And I get that from what you're doing with the Teach Middle East stuff, is that longer form conversation, isn't it?
It is. You know what's fascinating, Ben? When I do these talks with the principals, they often say to me, no one has ever asked me these questions. No one has ever checked how I got here or what I did. And do you know what else I find fascinating? The people who work in the schools with the principals don't know some of those things that I've managed to get the principals to talk about. They've never heard them talk about it. They don't know anything about their backgrounds. They don't know anything about, sometimes they don't even know the fullness of their own principal's education philosophy. Believe when I tell you. And so this way of sitting down with the principals and just saying, what's your education philosophy? How do you envision the future of learning? What legacy are you trying to leave? How would you like to be remembered when you leave your school? Like these questions, no one asks them. And so the podcast is an opportunity for people to dig deeper. And I love that.
Likewise, I do too, and I think there's opportunity, and this is what I'm hearing in our conversation, and obviously, having and done a little bit of research, learning about what you do and the work that Teach Middle East. What I really like is that we've been talking about education not being one size fits all for as long as I can remember. Steve, he's always very kind and gives really good compliments to people, but he also downplays some of the things that he's done for in education over many years, and the inspiration he's played for a lot of people in FE. And I know a lot of people do acknowledge that, but probably he doesn't always acknowledge it himself. Because one of the things that he talked about very, very early on when I first met him, and we met, what, 8 years ago, Steve, 9 years ago, and he was talking about having PD, professional development for teachers, that was personalised. And the irony of all of this was that what we did, what was normalised in most professional development, and Steve will probably explain this a little bit further, in most professional developments was there's a twilight session that everybody has to go to. And it's everybody, whether you are a teacher that's been teaching 12 months or a teacher that's been teaching 1,200 years, like, you're doing the same thing, whether you've got behaviour issues or whether you haven't got behaviour issues, whether you can do assessment or whether and it was very much done too, and PD done too. And I know that Steve developed like coaching models as well as that personalised professional development. And what I'm hearing from what you're doing there is that you're giving options here, aren't you? So you've got a podcast here, you've got meetups here, you've got a magazine that goes here. And I know, and we'll get into conferences and other bits. There's lots of opportunities to personalise it, aren't there? Steve, I don't know if you want to just kind of like touch at that and maybe give a little bit more context to what you've done there, and then we can talk about some of what Lisa's doing from that professional development stuff.
Yeah, I think a long time ago, I suppose, and it's been a journey. I don't think I'm a pioneer in anything, and probably worked with many colleagues that were. I can just think of many, but one of those people that stands out to me in education was a wonderful individual called Natasha Armitage-Evans, who's still at Luminate Education Group. Her coaching ability and her as a female leader, probably one of the best leaders I've ever worked with alongside, and her coaching models, approaches, and she worked in teaching and I worked in technology, but also then led library teams and all that kind of thing. And we worked together in regards to meeting people where they're at. That for a long time in education, Ofsted had judgments, observations had judgments. And I was like, you make a judgment, the problem is you change it from a number to a terminology or a letter or anything. It's still a judgment. And judgments will always be made. It's very difficult to move away from that. But how can we meet them, see where they think they're at? Sometimes their confidence in their ability is very far apart. And then you have to then do a little bit of coaching to get them to understand that they think they're Superman or Superwoman, but maybe they're just a person in a cape and they've got the pants outside of the trousers, and that's a bit inappropriate in education. But actually, as you go through that process, it's the case of, right, where are you at? How can we support you? What do you see you're at? As a leader and as a person, I think this is what I've seen over a period of time of working with you. These are where your strengths and areas for improvement are like. And I work on both of those strands. Don't just focus on the areas for development, because ultimately you enjoy the strengths, and that's why the strengths, you do all of that. And then from it, where possible, you create a tailored, personalised path for that person that works on it. They might be it's not all individual, it's not one-to-one, but you create pathways that are based on them, where they're at, what they enjoy, all of those kind of things. And we try to develop it as much as possible. We were really successful to do so without telling people I had to do it. So we got some really great uptake. And then the system changed where actually, because we got a real tipping point of people wanting to do it, it just was, I hate the word mandate, but because sometimes people want to be the first, sometimes people don't want to be last. Sometimes you have to tell some people that they have to do something to actually get them to engage a little bit better. But it was really, really successful and people enjoyed it. And we gave out things like free trips to Google, where I'd hire a minibus or I'd pay for people's train journeys to go down and see what the learning looked like there and meet some of the Googlers, and free swag. And every year people were doing great stuff. And I then said, okay, based on that, are you comfortable at public speaking? If not, let's support you if that's something that you want to do, and speak at BET. And I remember doing the first few and actually then getting educators to take my place and speak on the BET stands and do and the Google stands and everything else. And that meant that actually those people ended up being employed by me. because they came and worked in that space. It was a wonderful thing. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. And in terms of my leadership, I think I'm not the best, probably not the worst, but I'm honest. And I just do it with honest passion and care, which is often missed. And just trying with an honest approach, trying to understand where they're at rather than what I think they need, which is often done. And podcasting is something I love, and coaching is something I love. And leadership is probably, if you'd have asked me 5 years ago when people say, what are you good at and what do you want to do? I'd have probably said, don't really know, but I don't mind leadership. I enjoy it a little bit. Probably like you, Leisa. But how does that link to what you're doing? Because I think listening, you're doing podcasting, you cut the community bit. I've just been thinking, by the way, just on that, me and Ben are going to have a conversation after this. We've got some events coming up and everything else. And I'm like, how do we create some spaces where people can come together, connect, and chat more about what the content is? We do events, and speaking about your event, do you allow outside of those spaces for people to connect and discuss the ideas that they've learned and lean on me and learn from others, regardless of where they're at, so they can then take that magpie and apply it to the context of, I'm just thinking about it, I just don't think people give enough time to that space. But anyway, at least I'm waffling again. Go on.
No, go ahead. So one of the things we do, so we have an event coming up, which is the Middle East School Leadership Conference, and that's on February 5 and 6. And what we do is on each table, we have created, based on the theme of the event, we create what is called conversation cards, which, by the way, Stephen Bartlett stole from me, put that on record. Because when I saw it on his podcast, I was like, you thief. But anyway, I digress. So we put conversation cards around the theme, and we build time in for people to pick cards and talk to each other. Because what happens is you sit at a table at an event, but unless you are prompted, you probably end up talking to the people you already know, or maybe someone will introduce you to someone new. But you never get to meet the whole room. So what we do is at certain points, we direct it. To be honest, we was like, okay, guys, time to get up, move from where you are and go sit somewhere else. Pick a card, talk to somebody new, answer some questions, ask some questions, because you want to leave the place feeling like you've met as many people as you can, because not everyone you meet will turn out to be a viable contact, so to speak. So as an event organizer or, coordinator, you want to make that deliberate action of getting people to talk to each other and exchange contacts. We even have people give their LinkedIn, like, okay, time for us to get social. So exchange your profile with somebody else, or your Instagram or Facebook, whatever you use, with somebody else so they can keep in touch with you, or WhatsApp or your business card. But you direct people to do it, or else people will feel shy and bashful and they won't want to do it. So we just like, now is the time to do it. Let's get social. And that's how we do. And then we're always talking to people, whether it's on email, whether it's, we have a WhatsApp group, by the way, the Teach Middle East WhatsApp group. So we're always putting things out there. We've turned it into a community, because you know how WhatsApp, you could only have 500 and it had shot all the way over that. So now we've turned it into a WhatsApp community. So we have loads more. We always send out different bits on it. But one clever thing we did with that was we made sure only the admins, like me, my deputy Christina, my colleague Mansoura, my other colleague Richard, we're the only ones who can actually post, because if not, the confusion ensues. But we share as much as we can on that as well. So there are opportunities. We're just trying to create spaces where people can talk to each other, really.
Yeah, and those spaces for conversation are massive, because we want to contextualize it. We've talked about this on the podcast a lot. Like, it's not you copy and paste. It's like you can't just take somebody else's context and then apply that exactly like you talked about earlier. You can't take everything you learned in Tottenham and then apply that directly into Abu Dhabi. But let's say what it is. There are principles we can take from it, and then contextualizing that is what's powerful. It's almost like when people are given a curriculum, and then you've got to deliver that curriculum, and there's no movement and divergence from it. That worries me. It's a bit like what Steve was talking there about mandates as well. Just a couple of last bits, because I don't want to take any too much of your time, because I know that you're a busy person, especially with some stuff that's coming up very, very soon. You've got some. You do put these conferences on that you talk about that allows for conversation. You've got some coming up very soon. I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about the focus you've gone for over the next few months. Why you've chosen what you've chosen. Before we ask you a little bit about some of your thoughts that you've shared on LinkedIn recently.
Yeah, so we've got two events coming up. We do 5-6 events a year, something crazy like that. But the two that's eminent are the Middle East School Leadership Conference and the AI in Education Summit. For the Middle East School Leadership Conference, we're going with the theme of leading forward, building a leadership legacy. We've got Professor Rob Coe coming over. We've got Evelyn Ford, MBE, coming over. We've got Claire Gaspé coming over as well. We've got from here, Dr. Simon Rana, from GEMS, and a host of others. And really what we're getting together to talk about as leaders in the school is, what are we actually building? Are we building legacy, or are we just hopping from school to school, and when you leave, everything is dismantled and someone comes and starts afresh? And how do you lead forward? How do you create spaces where future leaders can grow and develop and thrive? Are you creating inclusive spaces for all the different diversity that we have in this world, whether it's neurodiversity, race diversity, all of the diversity? Are you creating spaces in your school, or are you a gatekeeper? And it's a way to really introspect, but also to learn from others, to look at, okay, how are other people navigating this space? And we also want to talk a little bit about continuity planning in schools, because I find when you go into some schools, if you are a leader taking over, you might get nothing, a blank slate. Even though the school's been running for 20, 30 years, when you come, everybody's like, okay, here's the key to the office, and that's all you get. But how do you ensure that you're creating a legacy that someone else can step into and run with tweaks? Obviously, no one wants to take something and not make any changes or add their special touch, but not leaving it empty, not everything crumbling when you walk away. We really must talk in education about continuity planning and business continuity, even though it's not business per se, but it is. Because schools tend to just do term by term by term, or year by year by year, and not think long term, 5, 10, 15 years, what happens when I walk away as the leader? So we're going into that. And then April, we're talking about AI, because we just have to, because it's everywhere. And what are you going to do if you don't talk about it? Ignore it?
Many people are, or still trying. But yeah, yeah, I think so. I totally agree. I love the continuity planning for education leadership. I think it's something that's done in business often, and see it more often. But actually, it's an interesting one, isn't it, in education, and because it does coincide with a lot of government changes. If they go through cycles, and how can you prepare for the next one when you've only got a short period of time in there? But they don't. Like, education leaders will often stay for a long period of time, and what does that look like? But also maybe a re-evaluation. Like, in education, there's this is what we've had. Let's bring that person in because they've left. Or say for any role in education, where ultimately, is that what you need right now? Is it flexibility? Do you need something that's very, very different, where you've had some strength in leadership, but you need somebody that has more of a digital background in terms of that's going to be, rather than just what was an educator, or somebody that comes from industry to try and in the community, because they need to be a bit more commercial, because they need to start to increase revenue outside of learning. All of those kind of things, people go, that's not really a thing as a leader in education. And you go, it pretty much is, because you're now a business manager and all those different things. Education leadership has changed drastically from I was a teacher and I've moved now. I don't know what I'm doing and I'm now having to do safeguarding and everything else. It's just very different. And I think that evolution of leadership in education is not considered, and that continuity is just from the person's leaving, and that honest approach of where have you left it? That honest approach of don't just tell everybody how amazing you are, because if you are good, people will probably see that and your team would be gutted when you're leaving. Be honest in your approach of what did you have ambitions to do that you didn't get chance to do? What were you working on that were partly finished? And what would you want to do in an honest appraisal if you were there for another 5 years? What would be your plan that somebody can then just go, that makes sense, actually. I'm going to completely do something different because that's their opinion to do so. But what is their business plan going forward beyond that? So, yeah, I like it. I think it's a really, really great topic. Yeah, I just wish I lived a little bit closer. It's not walking distance. I like to walk places. So,
One flight.
Well, so just as we kind of bring this up, two things that you mentioned on LinkedIn recently, and if anybody isn't following Leisa, the link for to connect with it will be in the show notes. But you posted two things that I think there's lots of things. Two things that I want to mention. One is that you talked about how educators can use LinkedIn. And it's a new space for a lot of educators, because when I first started in this space, it was very much a business place. But actually, from education perspective, more and more are going into that space. That was the first one. The second one you talked about is about pivoting. And now I like that because many of us have done that and are doing that on a regular basis. So I wonder if you can just maybe talk about like why you wrote those two pieces before we finish with our quick fire questions, and then we'll let you go.
Okay. So I write on LinkedIn whatever is on my mind and my heart. I don't have a set thing that, I must write this or I must write that for clicks or views or likes or whatever. The thing I wrote about using LinkedIn was I was speaking to a couple of people and I said to them, join me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I put out the call for presenters and things like that. And they were like, I don't use LinkedIn. And I said, you're missing a trick, because I think LinkedIn has come a long way. It's a good space now for educators to really share thought leadership and insights, or just give their opinions. And people are afraid to put themselves out there because they're afraid of, criticism or people seeing it or whatever it is. But I think if you are able to share what you do consistently, then people will learn what you're about and maybe even come alongside to offer their own ideas and insights that could potentially help you. That's what I have found. So that's why I wrote that piece, because I wrote it to say, these are the reasons why I think you should take part in this LinkedIn space. Now, LinkedIn is cringe on many levels, and they do get under my skin with a lot of things that I see. But what I put in that post is that I deliberately curate my timeline, and I use my not interested button. Sometimes LinkedIn suggests stuff to you and I'm like, nope, that's left of field. And I click X and it says, do you not want to see this in the future? And I write, nope, I don't want to see that in the future. And I keep doing that actively so that my timeline fits what I want to see. But as it relates to creating content, a lot of people think they have to come up and do these massive posts, but just 2 or 3 sentences about what you're doing in your school or what you've tried or what you're reading or your opinion on something that is current or topical. All of that is relevant because you're unique. So your take and your insights and your opinions are going to be unique as well. And I think people need to tap into that more. But above posting, interact, comment, get involved in the chats, talk to people on there, because you never know. You might meet somebody who can give you some insight or some heads up on something that might be of value. So that's one. Then I wrote about pivoting because I thought of myself. I struggle still every start of the term. I struggle with my decision to walk away from school leadership and teaching. I often get to the point where I go, maybe I should take, and I do get offered jobs. And I'm like, maybe I should take a role, And especially on an extra broke day when my salary don't look that attractive, I'm like, maybe I did it wrong. Anyway, no, I digress. But pivoting is scary. It is. However, I think you should. And I have my little cautious pivot theory that I've come up with, where if you have enough money to last you for 6 months to a year while you figure yourself out, or if you see another industry that you want to go into and where you are makes you so uncomfortable that it's affecting you physically or mentally, pivot. I say move. Or if you have that urge that says, really, I could be doing something else, or I could be doing something more, pivot. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of teacher guilt that people don't talk about. Other teachers give teachers who leave a lot of stick. They make it look like you quit because you weren't tough, or you quit because you weren't good enough. And I think that I call bull. Oh, I nearly swore on the podcast. I call bull on that, because I feel like if you are there and you're not happy, you're worse than the person who left, because the person who left had the courage to walk away from something that was not serving them, and chances are was not serving the students as well. And I think teaching is like going into the army. I think when you do your tour of duty, walk away, lift your cap, salute, and step. You need to be at your best. And that's why when you get to a certain time in your service in the army, if you were good, you get an honorable discharge. And that's how I feel. I was honorably discharged from the classroom and from my office as principal. And now I serve in another area. And when you get to that stage of honorable discharge in teaching, walk away as an honorable past member of the force, the teaching force. Don't feel guilty, and you're not quitting because you're weak. It's time to pivot. Do it.
Absolutely love that. Love that. Honorably discharged. Honorably discharged. I'm gonna use that often. So no, great point. That brilliant point made. We always do quick fire right at the end of the podcast. If you've been listening, then you should know. If you've not been listening, then why not? We need another listener to the podcast. But I'll go first, then Ben, and then I'll come in to finish. So the first question is, what's one outdated educational practice that we need to abandon?
Grading observations.
That actually was super quick fire. So quick fire, I couldn't get my answer out. So second question, how should we measure learning success beyond grades then?
Where are you now? Where do you want to go? And how are you going to get there? And then measure how close they are to where they want it to be after a certain period of time, an agreed period of time.
So, last one. What's one thing that you would want our listeners to remember?
I think it's personal. I want you to remember that no one is going to walk the path that you're walking. And so if you ever want to do anything, look within yourself first before you look outside.
I love that. And that's a lovely way to finish. And I know that the work that you're doing out there in the Middle East is having impact. Lots of people talk about your events and the work that you're doing. I heard about you before I'd been out there, met you, and I know that we've made connection, and it's really powerful to see somebody who lives and breathes what they're talking about. So we really appreciate your time today and the insights you've given us. And I know that people who listen to this will be able to go, there's something there, and hopefully most of them will be able to get some of the events. We'll link to some of them in the show notes as well. And if not, for this time, finding ways to connect in with you, Leisa's connection information is in there, and some of the stuff around the magazine and the podcast we'll link to as well. Thanks, Leisa, so much for joining us on the Edufuturists podcast, and we'll speak very, very soon.
Join over 30,000 educators at London's Excel in January 2025 at Bet UK. Headlining the arena, we have Stephen Fry, Dan Fitzpatrick, and Rose Luckin, to name just a few. There are 100 hours of CPD accredited sessions, from table talks to tech user labs, and over 600 exhibitors to inspire you with new technology for the new year. Educators, get your free ticket today at uk.vetshow.com.